All right, team. So week 6, mobility programs was obviously on deck this week. We have 2 weeks to go, so the things get wrapped up pretty quick here. But it's another cool week. I think it gives everybody an opportunity to program. Obviously, the intent was to be specific towards mobility, but we'll see some cool examples of kind of a blended. I saw two different types of programming being built out, just purely mobility, which is fine. That was the task. But a lot of you guys chose kind of a hybrid sort of rehabby mobility program, which is nice too, because frankly, that's often where we're going to be spending a lot of our time. So some of the programs were kind of blended with some, stability work or strength work, or some at least loaded mobility work on top of just the pure mobility work that we would often think of with that term. So it really wasn't a right or wrong answer here, but I think this is a unique week in that it just shows another facet of our game that we can do, especially as fitness forward PTs, something that the healthcare world doesn't get a whole lot of, is people who can kind of cover the whole gamut of taking care of these athletes. So not only getting them back from an injury, but also helping them performance wise, and mobility is obviously a part of that as well too. So I think what I'll do is kind of start out with some big hitters on what I'm thinking about often in terms of either reading over mobility programs or building them out myself for my clientele. I kind of have 3 pillars that I really like to make sure that I attack. And if we can piece those 3 things together, I think we have pretty good success. So we'll cover those top 3 things that I'm looking for in mobility programs. We can go over any questions after that if we want to, or else we'll just dive into some examples. I pulled up 5 or 6 programs. It's not the most exciting to review, just mobility programs. And frankly, I'm not necessarily trying to rip people apart from what they chose in terms of what exercise or mobility drill they chose, but we can talk about that too. I think it's more important to talk about the format, how we lay it out, maybe a little bit about dosage or frequency, things like that. I think that if we can dial those details in, we're better off. There's 10,000 ways to skin a cat if you're looking to improve lat mobility, but as long as we're kind of attacking our patient's goals, I can't necessarily that one exercise is guaranteed to be better. We have to have some creativity and willingness to work with our clients and figure out what the best fit is at the end of the day. So that's your guys' job. That's my job when I'm in the clinic as well too. So top 3 things though that I think I'm looking for or thinking about while building mobility programs out, or I guess even any program for my clients' accessory work. The first one being specificity. And this is obvious. I think in everything in the PT world, we're always talking about being specific, being patient-centered, whatever that might mean in this situation. But for me, specificity is 2 things really. It's if you have an athlete who, for example, is looking to get back into gymnastics work because that's where their mobility restrictions show up, where they've had a prior injury. Let's make sure that some of our mobility work and accessory work actually lives on that rig in some way, shape, or form. I think it's important for the success of that client, like filling that gap in from where they're at to where they want to be, but also from the mentality of an athlete or a client that you're working with. If we're so often left field, even if the drills are great and the exercises are great, I think the ability to kind of hone everything in with a specific direction to kind of keep people on task is really important, especially with something like mobility, which often is a long-term investment. I tell my clients all the time, it's like the stock market. Like this isn't, if we're looking at improving your lat length or whatever it might be, this isn't something that necessarily changes in 2 to 3 weeks. Usually, if it's truly a mobility restriction, often we're having to invest like good amounts of time over a long period of time. But the research is all over the board and what that might look like. But I think it's the long-term investment. The more time we put into it over a long period of time gives us the best return on investment. So being specific and keeping people on track there allows them to continue to invest. Because if they're off in left field doing random things, they may not see the value, especially if they're not making significant progress in those first couple of weeks, which is kind of typical for a true mobility restriction. So specificity point A was like dialed in to what they're hoping to get to, but also like I think it's important and hard to tell in these programs because we don't necessarily always know these patients. Some of you guys did a really good job at laying out the client that you're working with, but some of them were more made up avatars, which is fine. But making sure that we attack the specific tissue in the mobility world is also important. Example, if we talk about lat length again, or let's not talk about lat length, let's talk about shoulder flexion. So overhead mobility is restricted And we're just arbitrarily giving like a PVC eccentric lat stretch to improve that shoulder overhead mobility. It may work if that tissue is the specific target, but if they also have more of a posterior shoulder, like a capsular mobility restriction, maybe we can find a better exercise that better attacks their restriction. And then we blend that into some of these other exercises to get the end goal of like the overhead mobility. So we don't want to be choosing arbitrary exercises because they fit the vision of what we're looking for. We want to make sure we're dialing them in from a specific tissue standpoint, especially if it is truly a mobility restriction on board. My little caveat that I feel like, which is will be cool to see here, is that I'm probably programming 3 times as many like active loaded stability exercises to mobility exercises. I feel like a lot of our athletes, unless they've had like a prior injury or history of something that would really lead to a mobility restriction, I think a lot of people's mobility is just tied up in either weaknesses or imbalances that if we exploit through loading and strategic like specific loading exercises like that, I think we can make big changes. That's just a caveat there. So be specific. Point number one. Point number two, I would say, and I don't know that these are necessarily any specific order, but I think efficiency is huge. So I saw a lot of avatars and clients that were listed in some of these programs that were like 30-something-year-old CrossFit athlete who is a mother of two, for example. If we have 40 minutes of mobility programmed 3 to 5 times a week or whatever it might be, it's not that the 3 to 5 times a week is the issue. It's that the 40 minutes on top of them just trying to show up and be fit on a regular basis is really important, and to consider that investment. And again, if we really want to dial in that long-term approach, that long-term strategy of getting the best return on investment, I think we need to make it efficient for them to do it. So time is obviously the most a crucial part of being efficient, but also like the movements that we choose. Like another, I think a common theme that we'll see when we dive into these programs is that we get a lot of repetitive stimulus, 2 exercises that might be slightly different, but more or less are overlapping. And if we can pick or choose the best one of those exercises and eliminate the other one, not that it wasn't the right or the perfect exercise, just wasn't the best in this situation for that person, I think that makes things more efficient too. So when I'm laying out programs and mobility work and accessory work, I'm really making sure the exercise I choose, in my opinion, is the best one for that specific issue, and that I don't want to overlap too much so that I'm adding extra onto people's plates. I think that can be pretty discouraging when they realize that, a mobility program that is meant to take 12 to 13 minutes runs on to be 20, 22 minutes. They're asking you to do, or they're hoping to do this multiple times in a week and show up to the gym and take care of their kids and do whatever else they want to do. I think efficiency is super important. So be efficient, not only just from a pure time frame perspective, but also be efficient in selecting your movements. And it's okay to not give everything all the time. Sometimes less is more in this situation, especially if it gives them an opportunity to invest more into that time there. So, and the third one would be like organization, I guess. We can classify it as just being crisp and clean and organized. I think this is important from like a readability and reproducibility perspective. If you are sending someone a program via Google Doc or Excel or whatever you use, that's not the point. It's just that it needs to be well understood and needs to be something that people can read and understand. So whether that's allowing for video links to be in there just to refresh things, being really clear on the dosage, the time spent in certain positions, try not to make it crazy looking, because there's a few people's programs I look through where I was starting to get confused. And we all know that our clients will shake their heads yes, that they understand as they're walking out the door, but many of them will get home and read the title of an exercise or something and completely go down the wrong hole with that. So the more crisp and clean we can be from an organization standpoint, I think that will make this more effective and then also provide a better return on investment in long term. But with organization, I would also probably throw in there just professionalism. It's our time to shine. It doesn't have to be fancy. You're going to see different varieties of what people look to build out with some of these programs, but I'm not necessarily looking for fancy, but professional. Your logo at the top, it's a great marketing thing. Somebody might be, putting it on a laptop or on an iPad in the gym while they're reviewing it. And they might have a friend come by, ask them what they're doing, because everybody knows, especially in the CrossFit world, everybody's curious if they're not doing what you're doing, they want to be because they think they're falling behind. And they see your logo at the top of this Excel sheet. Like, it can be everything from marketing to just looking like clean and crisp at the top. And that all falls into that organization there too. So that was kind of my framework of reviewing these, and also what I'm considering them when I'm building them. I want to be specific, I want to be efficient, and I want to be organized and professional. And I think that will get you really in a good spot to start, because on top of that, the little things that you're adding into the program, the drills, we all have our own professional opinions on things. I think there's a lot of right answers or maybe a couple wrong answers, but for me to say that my one exercise at lengthening the lat is guaranteed to be better than yours, it's hard for me to commit to that, especially if you know your patient. So I'm not necessarily looking to pick people apart from what exercise they chose, but more or less how they dose them, how they organize them, how specific they were to their client and things like that. So any questions on just the framework, guys?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you tend to just pick like two or three things that you'll have them do repeatedly, or do you try to include any variety in throughout the week?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would tend to err more on the side of less is more and not adding variety, but be very specific about what you're hoping to get and have them double down multiple times a week. I think you're going to get more bang for your buck. Now, if you want to add variety, all I would ask is that you have legitimate podium to stand on where you can defend why you're adding that variety. Like, I think I looked at Melissa's program, and she had, it was unique. I'll show you guys later, but she had like a warm up or a prep section essentially. And then she had two different parts, like day one, day two, I guess, if I'm remembering correctly. But her day one and day two were so uniquely different in their, I think, in their attack. I didn't, I haven't talked to Melissa about this, but like as I was reading it, I was like, all right, cool. Like, as long as you have a reason to be adding more for a specific reason, like that you think you're going to get more out of that, then I think it's fine to add variety. But otherwise, if it's a run of the mill, like I have a client who's coming to see me because they've been having hip pain while squatting. And what I found through all of my assessments is that their ankle mobility was clearly their biggest restriction. And when we gave them, a gift of dorsiflexion and allowed them to elevate their ankle and they started squatting, their hip pain was significantly better. I know I need to improve the ankle mobility. What that means to me is that I don't need to add a bunch of variety. I need to pick the one or two, maybe three best exercises to improve whatever restriction you're looking to get at. And I don't think we need a bunch of variety. I think we need more time spent doing that one thing. So if you want variety, make sure you can defend why you want that variety or why you need that variety. And I think the more you add, the more confusion can come on board and people start to pick and choose what they find to be easier. Uh, like we all know we have our biases, like, oh, like laying on that foam roller, that was one of the exercises that coach gave me to do. That one's not so bad, I'll do that. And they miss all the more important things. So make sure that their stuff that you have built out for them is really, really dialed in from what you think is going to give them the best investment, so that they're not just wandering off doing other things because you gave them a little bit extra. Good question. All right, guys, what I'll do, I'm going to share my screen here. And we can pull up a couple of programs. Let's see here. So I'm not uploading these in any specific order. I kind of randomly went through and looked at probably 10 or 20 different programs this morning and just picked out a few for different reasons. So I think this was Trent's program. I'm not sure if Trent's on. Oh yeah, it looks like he is. So Trent, if you have anything that you want to speak up, and as I go through, if you defend yourself or explain, that's fine. But overall, I want to give Trent like a passing grade here, because what I loved about his program, it pulled up a little different on the PDF. My Google Doc version of this kind of put some spaces and unique parts in this, but this is super clean and crisp, easy to read. And although we don't have like this massive background on exactly who that he was trying to build this for, is where Trent can speak up if he wants to. But overall, I love the fact that he had his logo on the top. and basically laid out all the exercises what he was hoping to dose them out at, and he threw a couple notes at the bottom just to kind of remind people of whoever he's giving this to, I guess, what their focus is going to be, how long they should be investing in this, how many times per week, and then I saw this on a lot of people's. It's so easy now, guys, to have like a little QR code or something in the bottom of your programs or on different handouts or whatever you're giving to people. That I think he had this hyperlinked into some videos, just like that. That hits everything from the organization and professionalism standpoint for sure. So I think he nailed it there. Trent, did you have a specific person in mind when you were building this out? I'm not sure if I missed it, but I didn't see it when I was looking through this.
I just called her Jane Doe.
Yeah.
Essentially, one of my clients at the CrossFit gym that doesn't really necessarily have a ton of pain, but it's had shoulder pain in the past with like high volume kipping stuff, rig stuff, um, some overhead like snatch, squat stuff, but more of like a maintenance plan
Cool.
history that she can continue to do as she's becoming a high level CrossFitter.
Cool. Yeah. So the feedback that I would have here, again, this isn't necessarily cut in stone, has to be what I'm saying, but this is a good example of where I kind of went through your list of exercises here. So he had a half kneeling lat stretch, and then he had a thoracic spine rotation exercise where it was assisted. And then he did some eccentrics to the lat, and then he did a resisted thoracic rotation. Then he threw some PVC like Ys in there for some posterior shoulder strength and mobility stuff. So I don't disagree. I think these all have a part. Like for example, comparing the quadruped rotation, thoracic rotation, assisted versus resisted. Like one of those is truly built more for mobility, where the other one is built more for building strength and range of motion through strengthening. What I would do though, just to kind of from experience and from kind of like a condensing standpoint, is just start to kind of pick and choose where you feel like you're going to get your best bang for your buck. So I feel like in this situation, and we got the half kneeling lat stretch and the lat eccentrics. Eccentrics tend to be the way to really see a big significant change. Loaded eccentrics and creating shoulder flexion range of motion there and lat length compared to the half kneeling lat stretch. The half kneeling lat stretch is great. It's going to give you that stretch that you're looking for. But if you had to ditch one and stick with one, maybe you get rid of that half kneeling lat stretch, but you still have your eccentrics on board to help you with some of that overhead. And then the same with your thoracic rotation. I have found a ton of my athletes do just fine if they use just resisted thoracic rotation, meaning that they're almost just working more on building strength through their thoracic rotation rather than doing like a sort of backpack strapped assisted style. When I find that my athletes have to actually work for their range of motion in that position, big things happen really quickly, and they're more likely to buy in on that. And then you toss in your PVC Ys, which is purely like the really isolated shoulder, like posterior shoulder strengthening exercise. I think you can go from 5 or 6 exercises down to 3, make that 20 minutes down to maybe 10 minutes of time. That 3 to 4 times a week is much more reasonable. And I think you're going to get a better bang for your buck. Again, she's going to do great, or whoever this is will probably do fine with what you have. But if you had to look to make some changes, that's the only thing I really was talking about there, is just trying to be more efficient from like a movement selection standpoint. But again, that was just my opinion of the situation. I don't know how you feel about that, Trent, but if you have any thoughts, feel free to speak up.
No, I appreciate the feedback. I think that sounds really reasonable and efficiency wise, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, this is where I would say from my little caveat at the beginning, I said my caveat is that I spend 3 times as many, or I put 3 times as much effort into more of my loaded mobility slash strength exercises. I do just pure mobility, and that banded thoracic rotation, like the resisted version, is one of those examples that it's not that the other one doesn't work. It's just that this one seems to make people work harder, get more bang for their buck, and they feel something like they haven't felt before. And it's just like, I'd rather invest my time into that and then make sure this Jane Doe person doesn't get burnt out by repeating too many drills that might have similar overlap to them though. But otherwise, this is clean and crisp. This is not fancy by any means, and that's okay. It's fancy because it's got a QR code in there, but that stuff's legit these days, man. You got to have that on there. But it makes it so smooth and so easy to read. I really like that one overall. Question on Trent's at all? So this is Ryan's. Ryan's a little bit more elaborate. He had a more detailed avatar person here, so I'm not sure if this is actually, I'm assuming this is a real client. Again, I don't know if I didn't see Ryan if he was on or not, but if he is, he can speak up too. But he laid out an athlete here who is a professional football player who had a ACL reconstruction. So a lot of detail with this in terms of the patient history here, but ultimately this part highlighted in yellow on the top of the screen here was where he was really trying to attack, which was some ankle dorsiflexion and midfoot restrictions. And he had some data to back that up. So he put some time into this. But I liked a lot about his program is that first off, we have to consider this as a professional athlete. So they're probably able to maybe invest a little bit more time than just your standard, everyday hero kind of working warrior type person. So this seems a little bit more lengthy and more time consuming, but I'm not necessarily bothered by that because I think this person's going to want to and be able to put more time into it. So he starts his out with like a pre-workout, like I highlighted that here, before he really gets into his rehab and other workouts, attacking from more of a passive perspective, the soft tissues in the ankle joint. So he laid out this, mobility work for the calf, was just some foam rolling, gave it great detail. He went step by step. Which should help people stay in line with what they're looking to do. And then he had this dorsiflexion mobility drill with the banded ankle mobilization there. And again, this is all meant to be done pre his actual workout. So his mobility work in this situation was just some passive stuff, which, ultimately at the end of the day, probably doesn't give us the greatest results, but certainly prepares the tissue, because if we follow up afterwards with what this guy is supposed to do, is that 3 times a week, he's then going to go into some sled pushes, some goblet squat with some goblet holes, and then Bulgarian split squats. All of these really tied in nicely to his client's restrictions from that ankle, but also uniquely, I felt he did a pretty good job picking, especially all 3 of these movements are great at building quad strength, which we know are going to be huge for somebody post ACL. So I thought he did a great job in building this out from like a specificity standpoint, from a rehab standpoint, from a mobility standpoint. And I love the idea that basically he just chose strength exercises, loaded exercises to attack those issues that this guy had here. So he was pretty detailed on like his sled pushes, on how he wanted to approach those, like staying high on the foot. But then the goblet squats, he added some tempo work in there. And then the Bulgarian split squats, he was like really emphasizing that knee over toe. So, again, the Word document kind of cut things up here, but on the PDF version, Ryan's came out really clean and crisp. Thought he did a great job spelling out when things are supposed to be executed, how much they're supposed to be executed. And then he really went with more of a loaded approach to reinforcing all his mobility with the strength stuff here. So Ryan, are you on here? Dang, I gave him all the praise and he's not even here I don't think he's on here. Yeah, so good job for Ryan there. This is probably one of the more complete programs that we saw. So any questions on the way Ryan formatted this, guys, from even just like a separation standpoint of how he went real passive with his pre-workout and more active with his focus on actual programming here? I don't think I had any big feedback for him other than positive stuff. That he rocked this one pretty good. All right, Brett. I think Brett's on here, right? Yeah, I see Brett.
Yeah.
Cool. So Brett, this is a real client of yours?
Kind of a hybrid of, had a number of people all with the same similar type of restrictions to that thoracic extension, which
Okay.
is more limiting to the overhead position.
Yep. So yeah, so Brett's kind of built this out from experience in the past. We had a CrossFitter with limited overhead mobility and shoulder pain during any overhead movement for the most part. But primarily he wanted to focus on that thoracic mobility. So his goal is to do this 5 times a week, while just sort of working on gaining range of motion throughout that process. So the frequency here, guys, 5 times a week, I think that's fine to throw that out there, but that's probably like the most that I usually ask someone to do something. I'll sometimes have a conversation where I say, hey, I want this to be 4 to 5 times a week. and maybe they ask you, can I do it more? And in the situation of mobility, I don't think it ever harms anyone to do more, as long as you're doing it well, putting good time and good quality time in there. But I wouldn't push it much past 5 times a week, because I think it's one of those things, again, where for the average CrossFitter or average athlete you're working with, they're just going to be asking too much, and they're more likely to just shy away from it because it's an unrealistic goal. So, 3 to 5 times a week is probably the right answer for these mobility programs. So I think Brett was on with that one there, but just making sure we're having good conversation. So I made some specific notes. So Brett was asking for 5 times a week for 12 to 15 minutes total if we go through his programs here. Plus, this person perceivably is doing CrossFit. So we might talk about how we can condense some of this down. Brett used EMOMs, which at ICE we're huge fans of REMOMs, especially for accessory work. But I don't think that EMOMs are always they're not the wrong answer for mobility, but they're not always the right answer either. I think that the nice part about the EMOM is that it keeps people on track. You can really show them how much time they're going to be investing, but sometimes too, it's nicer just to slow things down. And you might even want positions or certain exercises that with setup take a little bit longer, and all of a sudden they're rushing, from one movement to the other, and they're missing the emphasis of that mobility work that you're trying to have them work on. So I think the idea of the EMOM is nice from a restrictive time perspective, but just make sure that how you build these EMOMs out, that you're getting enough of the volume of the good things that you want in there. And often what we can do is work on condensing it and just putting more time into a few things rather than a lot. And then we don't have to worry about the EMOM being the only way we stay on track. So ultimately here, I'm looking for maybe seeing if we can strategize a way to take this from 10, 12, 15 minutes to maybe like 8 to 9 or 10 minutes, and make that 5 time a week investment a little bit more reasonable. And I think we'll have some where we kind of see some carryover here in terms of maybe not having enough difference or discrepancy between movements. So Brett built out 2 6-minute EMOMs, meaning there's 3 movements that he plans to go through twice each, and he's doing 2 different ones. One is meant to open up extension, so more we'll think passive, and then the other one is meant to be more active. I love that idea. We just got done talking about that with the last program, even a little bit there, but let's see how this lays out. So EMOM number 1, he had foam roller thoracic extension for about 40 seconds, then some open books, so some thoracic rotation, 20 seconds per side. So he's shooting for about 40 seconds of work there as well. And then into an overhead reach with the PVC pipe over the med ball. So I highlighted for an example here, minute 1 and minute 3. In my eyes, these are fairly similar. Yes, they are different. You could argue they are different, but what I would try to do is more or less hybridize something more like in minute 3 to be at my main focus there, using that PVC to get the shoulders, using either a foam roller or a med ball to kind of get more of that thoracic extension work. I have sometimes had athletes even hold on to like a bench or a part of the rig or kettlebell or something with weight, a barbell, where they're getting a little extra oomph behind that. But ultimately, when I was reviewing this, I was just thinking like, man, that minute 1 and minute 3 could probably just be put into 1 minute. And then maybe you're using the open book exercise as a way of kind of active mobility to follow. And I think you could instantly take this from 3 movements to 2 and have them invest an extra minute in each of those, essentially, rather than spread that 1 minute out for just the foam roller extension. So I don't know how you feel about that, Brett. I'm certainly not telling you that's the only answer, but do you kind of get where I'm going with that thought process there?
Yeah, I like that. I like that feedback.
So as long as I'm understanding how you meant these exercises to be executed, I really feel like your minute 3 in that first EMOM could be all of minute 1 and minute 3 together. And you might even be able to add a little extra to it just to get more oomph in it with some loaded work there. But, and then we move on to second half. So another 6-minute, same concept, clean and easy to understand. It's 3 minutes, or 3 rounds, 2 of them each time through. This is more active work. So he's trying to actively engage some of this extension through not only extension, but some rotational work. And then he was clever enough to throw the dumbbell overhead carry in there too, to really focus on a little bit more of the specificity there. So the second one, is uniquely different. The quadruped sprinklers, prone PVC raises, posterior shoulder work, maybe some lower trap work, dumbbell overhead carry. I'm fine with the way this is laid out. I really think, Brett, you could do a good job at taking these 6 movements and maybe condense it down to 4 and just make one EMOM if you want to, or one program that only takes, the same amount of time or a little bit less. And you'll be able to invest more into the stuff that really gives her the biggest changes, or the biggest changes here. But otherwise, clean and crisp, easy. He threw the exercises in here with some photos at the end. He's got his Athletico logo on there. Maybe one day Brett's his own facility, he can brand himself, which is nice too. But otherwise, good stuff here. Brett, any thoughts or questions on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think when I was putting this together, it was like that idealistic view of like someone has all the time in the world to put 12, 15 minutes into something, to take their time going through it. But for those same people, I tend to condense things down to just even 2 or 3 things before overhead days, or if they're jumping on the rig.
Yeah.
And really anything that is going to be forcing them into that overhead position. But it makes
Right.
sense to just overall bring it back down.
Yeah, I think, I'm really trying to make it clear that that's the goal in these, because most of the time we're not working with those people who have all the time in the day, but it's all of our, jobs and our prerogative to talk to our clients about what they want to invest into it. We get this question asked a lot, like in our live course, when it comes to like the ankle, for example, of you got an athlete whose dorsiflexion is restricted, you pop some plates under their heels while they're squatting, and their squat gets tremendously better. And everyone wants to know, well, what now? Do we just elevate their ankles, or do we actually work on mobility? And usually our answer is it's an and not or situation. I think it's best to attack both of those there. But certainly part of my decision making comes down to talking to my client. Like if it's a 44-year-old dude who's an accountant who just joined a CrossFit gym 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, or a month or 2 ago, whatever it ends up being, because his friends are there and they invited him. He loved it. He went on a Saturday. Now he's hooked and he just wants to be able to squat better. I'm certainly saying to him, dude, let's find some Versalifts or something to get under those ankles and get you squatting good now, because ultimately you're here to hang out with your friends, have a good time, and get fitter and be healthier. And this is how we're doing it. Otherwise, your ankle mobility really isn't restricting you whatsoever in your regular life. So let's not take too much time to go make you do 20 minutes of mobility work, when really this guy is just trying to get back at it and join the gym and be a part of that community. So, and then I might introduce one of my favorite exercises to this dude and say, hey, like, I need you to make sure that you're focusing on adding these tools into your days where you're squatting, whatever I end up choosing, whether it's, a Versalift or something. But also, why don't we make it a goal that you give me, a couple minutes a day, just 2 or 3 minutes a day before class, that you're doing this like loaded barbell dorsiflexion stretch for me to help you, because I think in the long term, you're going to find that you're even better performer if we can do a little bit of both. But I think, throwing a 20-minute ankle work at him when he's only a month into CrossFit, it's either going to hit him like a ton of bricks, where he's like, this isn't what I thought I was going to get out of it. I really just wanted to squat better. Or he's just going to be like, dude, I can squat better when I put these things under my heels. Why did I even have to work on it? So I think we just have to have good conversations with our clients about what their expectations are. So certainly no right or wrong answer, but just opening up that idea that we're thinking about this. So good work there, Brett. Otherwise, everything was solid. So Dylan went with a different approach structurally. He used Excel, which Excel is nice. It kind of allows us to build things out a little bit differently. It's great to throw links in here. You can save these Excel sheets. And I know Zach Long's a big fan. Even when I first started working with Zach, I think he shared with me, he had this entire catalog of Excel or of YouTube links through these Excel sheets that he would help build out mobility and accessory programs for his clients. And it was just a nice little like organized platform to be working through. So this is great. Everything that Dylan constructed is more on the left-hand side here. So he was looking at snatch mobility. Looks like Zach just shared his Dropbox of that link there. So that's super, super valuable stuff there, guys. Don't miss that chat bar if you want to copy that link. Zach's done a great job with that. So, but yeah, Dylan's was a snatch mobility. So he broke it down into obviously an athlete who is struggling with ankle mobility and overhead mobility. So here's an example, or maybe we do have to add variety in that we're attacking completely different areas, but he went with a really similar approach. His ankle mobility was sort of passive to start with some foam rolling, and then he went with a good calf stretch off the step and followed up with some eccentric load. So I like the thought process: passive, kind of prime the tissue, stretch the tissue, load the tissue. I think that concept works really, really good. My big feedback for the ankle mobility here was more or less, we need more load. So this is also me speaking from experience of working with a lot of weightlifters and CrossFitters on ankle mobility. I think, in my opinion, this is one of the most stubborn joints and soft tissue regions to treat. We have so much load and demand going through those tissues at all times of the day. We're up and walking, we're moving, then we try to go do more dynamic things like squatting. That shit just doesn't seem to change until we really freaking load it up. Alan Frenendahl, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of him because you're in level 2, so you would have met him in level 1 or at a live course or something. But that dude's ankles don't move at all. He has like standard baseline negative 15 degrees of dorsiflexion. This dude can't get his ankles to budge. He was a toe walker. His calves are like the size of freaking watermelons. And he has experimented in every way, shape, or form how to get those things to bend. And what he proved to all of us is it takes a lot to get them to bend. And he also showed that they can handle a lot. So this guy was eventually getting into positions where he was sitting like in a deep squat with a barbell that he would like deadlift up and set on his thighs at like 225 plus pounds and hang out there for 2-3 minutes. And that was his main focus of mobility. And he actually started to chip away. But prior to that, the kettlebell work, the banded work, nothing was really making that needle move at all. He really needed to emphasize the load. And I think that's huge. That's my favorite go-to. The one that Alan uses is a barbell on the thigh. Basically, you can try a kettlebell as well, but the more the merrier sometimes if we have really stubborn tissues here. So yeah, so the ankle section for me and Dylan, in terms of review, I really wanted to preach load, but also thinking about snatch, the challenge of that for the ankle is having a tremendous amount of mobility, but it's always with a bent knee position. So at least the way this is laid out here, everything was done more in a straight-legged position. So this is sort of that specificity. Not that this wouldn't improve, it could improve his ankle mobility, but I certainly would try to add some bent knee ankle mobility in there as well, because we know how those tissues and like the soleus and the dynamic of that with the knee position can change. So I would just try to be a little bit more specific with that there. So overhead mobility, he had lat foam roller, so same concept. The PVC stretch, lat stretch, and then supine eccentric. So he kind of went with that same thought process. I don't really have much to argue with this. I think that thought process could work perfectly fine. But a couple of the thoughts that I had to maybe up this ante is that I find a lot of my athletes, after I've opened up their lats or their thoracic spine and they're working on overhead squat, for example, like with the snatch, that little RNT work, little reactive neuromuscular training can do a great help here. So this would be like a band hooked to their rig where you're having them hold that overhead position, maybe with even a PVC pipe overhead, get all those tissues to open and engage. After you've done all the passive work, you could add a little RNT in here, and that's going to be a lot more patient specific too, if that snatch and that overhead squat are their big struggles there. So Dylan, are you on here? I don't think so. But again, you can see too here just the difference between some of those earlier programs that had good labeling, good branding. His organization was great here, but you toss a logo on the header or something like that, it would go a long way. And it just ends up being a little bit more of a complete project. But I think we got some good details. Anybody have any thoughts on this snatch mobility work? All right, let's hit one more and then we'll open up questions just in all. I think we can kind of tonight talk about all programming questions. We can kind of bring this all back together. So whether it's mobility programming, accessory programming, strength programming, CrossFit programming, we can take the last 10 minutes or so to chat about programming, but let's find one more that we can go through here. I'll bring Melissa's up because I brought her up earlier and I know she's on for sure. So Melissa, you have your own performance physical therapy shop, right? You're working out of a gym somewhere.
Yeah, I operate out of my affiliate.
Nice. Where are you at?
CrossFit West Chase in just outside of St. Petersburg, Florida.
Nice. So I kind of figured you had something. I Instagrammed you and you've done a great job. Like you got a cool little thing going on down there. And so keep up the good work there for sure.
Thank you.
So yeah, you can, if I'll kind of go through and explain what I picked up on. Feel free to pipe up and if you have anything you want to fill in the gaps with. But this sounds like a little bit more of a specific client as a female CrossFit athlete who has had multiple months of left shoulder pain with pressing overhead and gymnastics. So Melissa did a good job kind of listing out some of her findings, her objective findings there. And then here are my notes and we'll go through it. So I think the workload was reasonable in this situation, as we'll see. And I already mentioned she was good at differentiating, even though there was, two different programs essentially that she had here. I think that they were attacking things uniquely differently. But I did have the idea too of this is where we can kind of bring things back. This is clearly an athlete who is trying to press overhead and do gymnastics, I'm assuming, because she's having pain with these positions. So finding a way to close that gap a little bit more on some of the drills and work that you're doing may be beneficial here. But I was going to ask, Melissa, is this like a client that is a real client of yours? And if they are they like highly irritable? Are they lower on the irritability scale? Could we have challenged them more? Like, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know this person, or they may not be a real person, but what do you know about this person?
Yeah, so this person is real. Her irritability level is very high.
Okay.
Even just with doing like banded external rotation some days, she's at like a 5, 6 out of 10. So there's really only a few things that right now I'm able to do with her. Even some of the things on this list are like kind of hit or miss some days. But yeah, her irritability level is really high.
Okay. And then in terms of her training right now, like what is she like, what do you have? Like, is she training based on just like her symptoms? Is she the type of person that kind of just pushes things no matter what? Where's she at with training?
Yeah, so she has a coach and her coach and I chat frequently.
Okay.
So it's really been really just avoiding anything on the rig right now. Really anything overhead too, in terms of like metcons and strength work, unless it's something that I'm giving her, which is some stuff that you'll see here, just 2 days worth. And then her coach is giving her some as well. We're kind of on the same page with stuff. So we're both giving her stuff in that regard. But other than that, like kind of like how we talked about with in the lecture, like she's doing a lot of, or at least I think that this is for next week's stuff, but she's doing a lot of conditioning right now.
Mhm.
And that sort of thing.
Nice. Perfect. Yeah. So it's helpful to hear. This gives us, the program way more context to be around. So we'll kind of walk through it as a team here. But her day one, I thought she did a great job, like staying on track. Melissa, I should say, did a great job staying on track with what her findings were and what she was trying to attack with this client. And she basically Melissa built out a program of where she preps everything with like a warm up, and it is a lot more of the passive stuff. So she's got thoracic extension of the foam roller, some snow angels over the foam roller, and then she throws some cars in there. So just some really controlled mobility work at the end. So I'm fine with all that. It's clearly meant to be a prep work for her. And then she does two separate little programs here. So her first one, the main work here, is very stability focused. So as you go through these bottoms up kettlebell holds, arm bars, serratus wall slides, they're not really essentially what we'd consider mobility exercises, but I'm okay with that because this is often where I spend a lot of my time too, is kind of highlighting where people's mobility and deficits live and really attack them through some more loaded terms of things that you can get two birds, one stone out of here. So she does a lot of static holds here, which is great for, irritability in the shoulder. She's working on some specific stuff with certain tissues like the serratus, and the kettlebell arm bar is just a fantastic way to like challenge the shoulder at a high level without really putting it in a compromising position. So her main work, we'll call it like section A, was very stability focused. If you look at her day two here, she kept it very simple, same warm up. This is a perfect example of we don't need different stuff. She just does the same stuff to get her prepped, but she's a lot more what I call like dynamic focused here, where this would probably fall into more of her rotator cuff and trap work that she's working on. But she's got PVC liftoffs, she's got banded scaption, D2 flexion. This was embarrassing, but I do not remember which direction D1, D2 are anymore. I haven't used that language in a long time, but I do know that she's working on positions of challenging that shoulder and scaption and some of the things that she had mentioned up in her objective findings here. So it sounds like for an irritable client like she's got, who wants to get back to overhead, who wants to get back to gymnastics, this may be where we start, but ultimately, hopefully this will morph and kind of challenge her to wherever she's at there. But I thought you did a good job at keeping things simple, but yet providing a lot of value in different ways there. So
I actually think I uploaded a different version of this too, because I don't know what happened, but something when I uploaded it something got, I don't know, something happened, and I ended up looking at it again, and I ended up putting like a landmine press somewhere in either day one or day two. I think it was day two. And day one I also put in like a single arm bar hang. But yeah, kind of along the same stuff.
Yeah, but I chose this program to show mostly from the fact that although week 6 is a lot of mobility work, you obviously threw mobility work in there with your warm-up stuff, but I love the idea that you're really more or less focused on loading. And I think that's something that can sometimes go missed when we think about mobility work, but I think load goes a long way from not only building strength, but also helping people with their range of motion. So good stuff. All right, team. There's 5 or 6 different but good examples, hopefully seeing that there's no right or wrong answers, but we definitely hit a lot on those major touch points of making sure that we're specific, efficient, and organized. I think that was a good conclusion and a good starting point for us too. So we got a good 10 minutes or so left. Let's just open the door to any questions about programming in general, whether it's mobility, stability, accessory, strength, CrossFit, you name it. I got 10, 12 minutes here. As long as you guys have questions, we'll sit here and hang out.
Okay, I have another question. There was a big emphasis on the difference between flexibility and mobility in the lecture. So my question, because I think I understand the differences, but my question is, how do you measure mobility then?
How do you measure mobility? So if we're looking at the difference between flexibility and mobility, flexibility would be the extensibility, the stretch of a tissue. I always just think somebody like yoga who can put themselves into crazy positions, they're flexible. They are also mobile. But in the fitness athlete world, I think the simple answer to how do I assess someone's mobility is often either through specific tests, like a Tyler's test, for example, if we're using that for posterior shoulder, but more specifically, whatever movement they are struggling with. So that could be videoing them during their kipping mechanics to look at their thoracic extension and their shoulder flexion. It could be, watching the difference in their trunk position after mobilizing their ankles to see if that ankle mobilization actually helped them have a more upright trunk and squat better. So I would put almost all my eggs in the basket of just watching that athlete or that person do whatever it was that they struggled with as my way of assessing mobility. Because in my mind, mobility is the ability to control and use your flexibility or your tissue length. And often that means that it's either in a dynamic movement or under load or both. So I would use that movement as my assessment for the mobility. Or if I had an objective test, definitely go back and use that specific test to see if they've improved in their mobility. I think some of those words do get tossed around a lot, and people have different definitions for them. But I think it's sometimes, especially in the strength world, more important to be mobile, to be able to put yourself through positions than it is to be flexible. And in fact, I've seen some people who I think struggle to be proficient in sport, and especially explosive sports like strength sports, who are just too flexible and have a hard time controlling all that flexibility through their mobility. So they do go back and forth, but I think they definitely live in the same world.
Do you consider then a mobility program, would you consider a program that where the primary focus is motor control to be a mobility program, or do you think there's always a component of increasing flexibility as well?
That's a good question. I think we're getting a little bit into some semantics. I think in a group of people like us on a Zoom call who all have a background in physical therapy, we could probably say that, yeah, motor control could be a part of a mobility program. I think to the layperson, I think most people, when they think mobility, the average person, they think of things that like increase flexibility. And so I may not call it that with my client. Often I literally clump everything into accessory program, especially with my fitness athletes, because it's a word that resonates well with them. And I can put whatever the hell I want in an accessory program, and they don't have to, ask about definitions of what that might be. So I do think that in a room full of people who have a deeper understanding, that it'd be fine to consider motor control a mobility program. But I would just kind of chunk everything into my accessory work for every client I'm working with. Good question. Zach, do you have any big hitters that you like to think about with mobility programming, or things that we didn't touch on today?
The biggest thing I'm thinking of is time. That's where I see the most mistakes made when people have to gather 5 different pieces of equipment, look at multiple videos, then the program itself isn't organized in a way that gets it done as quickly as possible. And that's when it's going to take more than 10 minutes a day for people to do stuff, your compliance is going to drop down dramatically, and so will your results.
For sure. I have listened to recently in the last year or two a bunch of different podcasts and read some different articles on, peer reviewed, we'll call it mobility work, like how much time do we have to spend in a position to see change, for example. And unfortunately, like a lot of things in the science world, the answer is it's all over the board. And I think anecdotally, I could say from experience, like in the yoga world, I have clients, and even like my wife who's gotten a lot into yoga, like she puts a lot of time, not only longitudinally a lot of time, but also acutely a lot of time, like in positions like, whatever crow pose or whatever position she's working at. So it's hard for me to say that like more isn't more in mobility. Sometimes I think that if you have stiff ankles and you put 3 to 5 minutes of load through them, that it might be better than putting 1 or 2 minutes of load through them. But the research doesn't always support that. I think that sometimes the research is pretty sparse, that they basically show there's a point around a minute, give or take, where the return on that gain isn't really drastically better. But yeah, I've seen anecdotally a lot of times where I think that it is. And I think it's important to remember that, evidence-based research is not just purely what's written in articles, but, what we believe and what we've learned and what our clients believe and what they've learned as well. I think that at the end of the day, true mobility changes occur more longitudinally rather than acutely. So I think you can get creative with your acute approach on your dosage. I don't think it has to be 10-minute stretches and holds, prolonged positions, but also, 5 and 10-second stretches may not be enough. So I often am doing a lot of like 60 to 90, maybe up to 2 minutes in a position, and then allowing that person to have a little bit of freedom to kind of move in and out of it, depending on the comfort level that they have with that. As they get more invested in that position, they can tolerate it a little bit longer. We can go a little bit longer, but I think you have some flexibility there. No pun intended.
Do you think there's any benefit to doing like smaller chunks of mobility work more frequently throughout the day versus saying like, hey, you're going to do 10 to 15 minutes of mobility work a couple of times a week versus maybe hit like a minute or two, kind of like breakfast, lunch, and dinner more often throughout your day?
I think that would go a little bit into what I was just talking about. I don't know that there's like a guaranteed right or wrong answer. I think that's going to come down to the person you're working with. Like, let's just say you have more of a formal client who is experiencing pain and discomfort due to, their stiff and weak thoracic spine. And then, it's provoked with sitting and work and things like that. I've had plenty of times where I've encouraged my clients to say, hey, 10 minutes a day was the goal. Why don't you, break that into a couple times a day and get your 10, 12 minutes like throughout the day in smaller chunks. And I think that could work really well for some person. But in terms of like outcome, I don't know that I can tell you that it's going to work better or work, not as well. I think, given the person's sort of symptom behavior model and what you've been dealing with, I think that's very plausible that you break that up throughout the day, but also they may have equally as good benefit just doing it all at once. So I typically am programming more of like, the 8 to 10 minutes at one time, pre-workout, post-workout, while they're watching Netflix at night, whatever it ends up being. But I've certainly had people break that out throughout their day as well.
Thank you.
We got time for one or two more questions. Programming in any capacity, all things are fair game. All right, we'll call it. I'll give you guys the extra 4 minutes back, and you guys can go work on your own mobility work or something, whatever. I'm sure we all have things, especially after the open. My quads are a little tendy and lats are a little tight, so I might go hammer some stuff out myself. So, all right, guys, we got 2 weeks left. Keep up the good work. Make sure you're getting your assignments in. If you have any questions or concerns, shoot me an email about those, or Zach or Mitch. Any of us can help you with that. Otherwise, these last 2 weeks should be fun, and I appreciate your guys' effort. So we'll talk to you next week.